fall before COVID began, I got a phone call late one evening that my brother was on his way to the ER, that they didn't know if he was going to make it or not. So I rushed from York, Pennsylvania to Baltimore and got to the emergency room. When I got there, he was awake and was rather combative. He had been 5 days without dialysis, and he suffered from polycystic kidney disease, the same disease that killed both my older brother and my father. And he should never have gone that long without dialysis. Well, they sedated him and began the dialysis treatment. And when that was completed, he was much more coherent. He was more himself. And they took him up and put him in the ICU. And I sat with him all night. My brother has never been known to be a Susie Sunshine kind of person. And he was getting pissed that every time he fell asleep, someone came into the room and woke him up and talked to him like he was 3 years old. And he wasn't having any of that stuff. They would say, "Hello, do you know where you are?" And his answers became Taiwan or Texas or the mall. "Do you know your name?" Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman. I mean, he was pissed. And eventually they called me out in the hall and they said, we're concerned that your brother may have tried to commit suicide. And do you think that's what happened? And I said, no, he assured me that his next dialysis was to be the next day. He'd missed a day because he was sick and couldn't get on the van to take him to dialysis. And I knew that if he had tried to commit suicide, he had much better, more effective ways to do it than torture himself through the final days of his life. And then they asked me if I thought he was delusional. And I said, no, he's just pissed. I said, he knows exactly what he's saying. I said, his conversations when you're not in the room with me are perfectly reasonable, and he just wants to be left alone and to feel better. Well, they did another dialysis early in the morning, and when that was completed, they moved him into his own room. Now, this was Saturday morning. He found out that they were not going to do any other test. They were not going to do dialysis. They were not going to take him and have any consults or any other doctory, hospital-y activities until Monday. Well, he decided he was not going to sit in there until Monday and do nothing. So he checked himself out of the hospital against the doctor's recommendation. And I took him and we ate breakfast together and I took him home. Decided at that point that I was down closer to my home growing up and that I was going to take a little walk down memory lane. And I was driving around the community where we used to live. We had a 18-acre farmette at one point in time. Half of it was woods, and we farmed about 4 or 5 acres, corn, tomatoes, okra, that kind of stuff, and sold them on the side of the road. And now there was 30 big McMansions on that property. And I sort of pulled in and was driving around the development, and I noticed down in the ravine, there was a walkway that looked like it led down to the river. We lived right next to the Severn River and the property ended up there. So I walked down to the walkway and started down toward the river. And I looked up on the hill and there was a deer standing there staring at me. And I thought, wow, that's cool, you know? And I went on down and I sat on the end of the dock and I thought about my brother and my father and my other brother. And I cried a little bit and I prayed a little bit. And as I walked back up the boardwalk, there on the side of the boardwalk, about 10 feet away, lay this deer. And he looked up at me and I looked at him and his eyes and mine just connected. And I knew at that moment, that was my older brother, Charles, his spirit there to meet me. And I started talking to him, how have you been? We've missed you. Um, Clark is in the hospital and I just took him home and he's not doing well. And he really misses you too. I said he missed that he wasn't able to be with you that much. And the deer looked at me and got up and he walked a little further along and I followed him. And he stopped at this grapevine that was hanging from the tree. Same grapevine that we used to swing on and climb on and play Tarzan. And he sort of pushed it with his nose. And I really started crying then. I stood there for hours talking to him. I made some ivy crowns and I picked some moss and some bark off the trees and picked up some rocks. And he looked at me as it was getting dark and snorted, jumped over that grapevine and made his way back into the woods. I still have all those things that I gathered that day. And when I'm feeling a little homesick, they're sitting there in my office and I can look and I can see them and those memories that were there. And that was my brother there with me in the form of that deer.